Hello and welcome to the first ever Seeing Things podcast. This is Colette Grace and I am hosting book club. This is Mothman Prophesies by John Keel, and this is the first book we're going to cover today. I'm really excited about this. I have read this a couple times now. I should say I listened to it a couple times. I listened to it on Audible first, and then I went and got this copy from the library because I wanted to have a hard copy to go through and do a book club with you. So what to expect from this. It's not necessary to have read this book. You can get the information from just this podcast if you don't have the desire to go out and read this book. If you have read this book or if you want to read along, I suggest reading the first few chapters before starting this. It's not like there's spoiler moments necessarily because, the story is pretty laid out. It's just going into detail about what each chapter is about, and I'm going to talk more on some points. This book was written in 1975 by John Keel. John Keel is such an interesting character. I really appreciate his investigation style. He approaches things open-mindedly, and that's one of the reasons I really enjoyed his books. He's very evidence-based rather than just picking up the hype and running with it. He wants to know more about why. He's not like trying to prove something. He wants to investigate it. Kind of like my perspective where I'm like, I want to know why. I'm not trying to say, did this happen? Did this not happen? What are you seeing? It's like, I believe people. I believe my own self when things happen. So I'm not here to contest whether phenomenon is real, like whether cryptids exist. That's not where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the belief perspective. Something is happening. What is it? That's what I'm more curious about than actually trying to prove something. I'm not trying to prove anything. And that's kind of the approach he takes. So if you just apply investigative, journalistic approaches to your research, you're going to come up with some very interesting things. And I also like that, like his ultra terrestrial perspective, he comes at it from a perspective that I don't see a lot of people latching onto these days. They're just, anyway. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This is going to be the first and second chapters of the book. And we're going to cover usually a few chapters at a time. We'll see how long it takes to get through this, but go ahead and read those few chapters if you would like to, just for discussion's sake. But I have a little notebook here. I've been making notes, things that I'm interested in, things I want to know more about, and I'm just going to share some of those with you while I go along. So the beginning of this book, Chapter 1 starts out, it's Beelzebub visits West Virginia. I really like how he starts this from the perspective of how do folklore legends start. He uses himself as an example. With that, he describes a scenario where it's a dark, stormy night, and this stranger with a beard, and apparently this is November 1967. Apparently, there weren't a lot of people in West Virginia with beards at that time. Most people were clean shaven. And a man dressed in all black just is approaching people on their porches late at night, asking for a telephone or help. And people are very nervous and skeptical. They don't know people around with beards, and people don't dress in all black and come around on people's porches asking for a phone. So this terrifying thing, like story, starts going around that Beelzebub, that's what they came up with, was visiting people at night. And the truth of it was just him. John Keel, he happened to be in the area on one of his investigative expeditions, like I said, November 1967. And that's how the story of Beelzebub visiting, like it was supposedly like an ominous character, because a few days after he had broken down at night, and a few days after he had broken down and gotten stuck and just needed somebody to make a phone call so he could get help. He just needed help, really. But he used himself in that situation as an example about how some of these folklore stories start. And so you have to approach it objectively. That's why the research approach that he has is highly effective, because sometimes there's a simple explanation for the things that happened, but to them it was like a foreign thing happening. He had visited a few different people's houses incidentally, this is where he first brings up the collapse of the Silver Bridge, which that was a very tragic event that happened in West Virginia. That gets elaborated more on later in the book. I'll definitely get more information for you on that because that was kind of a significant event. People were like, oh, that was a bad omen. Beelzebub, dressed in black with a black beard, came out on a stormy night, knocked on people's doors, and a few days later, the bridge collapsed. So this whole urban legend started due to that, which, yeah, I could see how people would think that that's, I don't know, crazy significant, but you know, it's just, you never know how these things start. So yeah, approaching things with an objective, or just thinking this could have a reasonable explanation. Let's look at all the possibilities before we're claiming, hey, a paranormal event happened. So I do really like his explanation. That's how he starts out the book. Real simple, but also very poignant. And a lot of people who answered the door to try and help him or find out what was going on ended up dying in that bridge collapse, unfortunately. Yeah, this also is mostly taking place in the Ohio Valley, this book. The Ohio River is very much involved. Apparently that's a hot spot. That whole area is significant for flaps, and if you don't know what a flap is, you know, you can research that, but basically just significant places where paranormal activity tends to be concentrated. So, yeah, he goes through talking about how he got into this adventure in the Ohio Valley, how he had spent so much time in West Virginia researching all of this. He was a little bit skeptical when first approaching it, which, you know, I know he was involved in ufology or UFO lore and research previous to this. He had a lot of experiences himself. So I know that was something he was already involved in. But as far as cryptids, I don't think, from what he says, he wasn't involved in cryptid research previous to this adventure. So he came into it with a very, very not disbelieving, but skepticism, which was great for the book. Oh, okay. So I really like, he comes into, I do like this too. He starts addressing the concept right out the gate of tulpas or egregores. I prefer to call them egregores. And this is such a fascinating topic for anyone involved in the paranormal. When you're dealing with the ghost world, you do realize there are elementals, there are things you don't understand, things you can't see, but then there's also just something that you can't explain, but you're like, this doesn't seem right, and you realize that there's a distinct energy that can be left behind when someone has created a lore. So basically, when enough people believe the same thing or have like this energy working toward, like, they're all scared about the same thing. So like people are like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so scared of this area, it's creepy. And then they come up with a story and they think they've seen something. Maybe they have, but regardless, a lot of times egregores are the thing that's created through the energy of people agreeing upon something. So he uses the example of the haunting. Oh, in Greenwich Village, harbors a strange ghost. Hans Holzer, he brings up Hans Holzer. I really like Hans Holzer. His research was fascinating as well. And other ghost chasers have included the house in their catalog of haunted places. The phantom has been seen by several people in recent years, dressed in a long black cape and wears a wide-brimmed slouched hat pulled down over its eyes as it slinks from room to room. So he is bringing up how in that house there lived a writer named Walter Gibson. He's an extraordinary, he's like a prolific writer. He wrote like a novel a month for a long time. full-length novel each month. And many of those novels were written in his house, in the house in Greenwich Village, the one that's haunted. And all of them were centered around this spectacularly successful character Gibson created in the 1930s, the nemesis of evil known as the Shadow. And his description of this person or this being is the description that people come up with or describe when this paranormal account happens in this house. And this house, like, it had never been reported that this had been seen there previous to this man writing these novels there. So he created an egregore, it would seem, that kind of stuck with the house. And the funny thing about egregores, or tulpas, I think that's what the Native Americans called them, they don't know they're not what they're said to be. They don't know that. Like, they have their own energy, and it's honestly, sometimes I think haunted objects are that as well. When somebody's creeped out about something and then this lore starts about it. And imaginations can run wild, and I'm not dismissing any paranormal activity as being possible, but a lot of things are definitely egregores. And that's the thing, you can just create a haunted object, a haunted thing by a belief, but it is definitely something seems to be like a necessity for people to believe it. A large group of people, it seems. Anyways, the egregore, the thing itself, doesn't know that that's what it is. So anyway, he brings that up and brings that into question in certain, like in this scenario. Why does he bring that up though? Oh, he was like, yeah, he was talking about the strength of the mind and how significant of a role this plays in the paranormal world. He's getting into bringing up ultra-terrestrial theory, which I am a proponent of. I don't dismiss other possibilities, but I'm very much an ultra-terrestrial theorist. And so John Keel is talking about how egregores or tulpas come into being and how they don't know what they are, but your mind is powerful. Your mind is capable. It's creative. It's capable of creating substantial things that come out of the imagination and actually exist. So like you can bend spoons. People have telepathy. Like things come, like the mind is powerful. That's the point. It's like, obviously we have the ability to create something as significant as a spirit or a phantom, something unexplainable that enters into being. So yeah, I do believe that is a significant cause. Like that's a significant amount of hauntings are the perpetual feeding of the energy of this place is haunted. Yeah, it will stay haunted as long as people are having these interactions with whatever's there. Not all of them. Obviously, I believe that there are some energies, ghosts or spirits that are left behind with business that needs to be done. I do believe that. I do. But there is also it has to be acknowledged that egregores are real. That's a thing. And yeah, if you do enough crazy satanic rituals in a place, you're going to create a very evil presence that will stick around for a very long time, which has like that. Yeah, that's real. That's real. So not to be dismissed. It's not like, oh, this is all made up. No, it's not. But where it came from and how you deal with it, I think it's useful to know what kind of a thing you're dealing with. And a thing that doesn't, like a spirit or a being that doesn't know where it came from or what it is, there's a lot of confusion in that. I think that creates a lot of like darkness, honestly. I really do. Okay. I mean, because let's be honest, people who create stories around, they're not often making light, beautiful stories about things that grant wishes and bring you good things. They're usually making stories up about really terrifying, sinister stuff. That's usually where people lean when they create this imaginary thing, unfortunately. Oh, he brings up, there are archaeological sites in the Mississippi Valley which have been dated to 8,000 years ago, long before the Indians are supposed to have arrived. Some of the Indian mounds, there are hundreds of them scattered throughout North America, are laid out and constructed with the same kind of mathematical precision found in the pyramids of Egypt. I'm also an ancient civilizations believer, where probably history is a little more ancient than the history books allow for. And yeah, I mean, if you're on my page, you probably already feel that way anyway, so I don't feel like I have to explain that. But yeah, so he brings up the puzzling artifacts and ancient constructions found throughout the world were the products of a single worldwide culture. The cult of believers in Atlantis were the principal advocates of this idea. So sober scientists naturally turned away from it for a theory that is almost impossible to support. Scientists really hate things that you can't really prove. I get that. It is theory. That's fair. Now he brings up flying saucer entities and contactees in almost every country. Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of interesting conversations had in this book from people he interviews who are contactees. It's super fascinating. He brings up Eric von Daniken, which we know from Ancient Aliens. I've read a few of his books. John Keel, claims that he says deliberate misrepresentations of archaeological curiosities. That was his accusation. Von Daniken seems to be totally ignorant of the works of European scholars such as Brinsley Trench, Paul Mistraki, and W. Raymond Drake, who have examined the same curiosities very carefully in the past 10 years and developed elaborate philosophical hypotheses about the intrusion and effects of alien beings on mankind since the beginning. Their concepts are wider in scope and significance and far better documented than von Daniken's simplistic efforts. I found his stuff interesting, von Daniken, but I think that John Keel's method of research and like how he draws conclusions, he does not appreciate what von Daniken brings to the table. I do think that von Daniken maybe is a wide blanket. Like he has his own, like, this is how it is. Like, and that's fine. Like, you do your own research, but there's like, this is how it is. And like everything has to fit into, it's kind of like the scientific method where it's like, I believe it's this way. So I have to find evidence to support that. No matter which way I look, like what I look at, I always find evidence to support that one way of seeing things. So I do find maybe that von Daniken's stuff is a little narrow in that regard. I do agree with that. But it's still worth a read. Not dismissing von Daniken at all. I appreciate hearing him speak on a lot of topics. That identified flying objects have been present since the dawn of man is an undeniable fact. They are not only repeatedly described in the Bible, but were also subject of cave paintings made thousands of years before the Bible was written. Yes, I like how he covers just the historical aspect of like, this isn't new. This isn't like something that's people are pulling out of the hat. Like, it's been around for a long time. So they don't seem to be tulpas or hallucinations or psychological constructs. They are momentary materializations of energy that come from dimensions beyond the reach of our senses and beyond the reach of our scientific instruments. That is very true to this day. I'm sure that our government and other various people have figured out how to experience this. I mean, the Monroe Institute is really good at being able to contact. Depends on what field of research you're in, but there are measurable ways to find or access some of this stuff. But it is undoubtedly it has always been in our world. It has always been here. It has always been a part of our it's always been a part of our traditions. It's in every country, in every culture's history. So this isn't new, and he addresses that. So this is a really interesting point in part 4 of chapter 1. He's talking about the paranormal phenomenon being so widespread and so diversified yet sporadic. So it's hard to study a specific element of it because of how just prevalent and widespread, but like sporadic it is. But that the phenomenon adjusts its manifestations to support the beliefs, and then it's like it latches onto the phenomenon, latches onto belief systems, and like rides it. It's like, oh, this is what we believe, and then the phenomenon seems to ride that belief system, which that's actually something I hadn't really thought much about until reading this book, where I'm like, yeah, that is a bizarre thing where you have all these different traditions, but the phenomenon supports it. It's like, yeah, that's how it works. But it's based upon the belief systems. If you believe that flying saucers are astronauts from another planet, they will begin landing and collecting rocks from your garden. Strange but true. It's like it's seeming like it's a part of us, which is why I do come back to the whole ultra-terrestrial thing. It's a part of us somehow. Then again, though, so if you're coming at it from the phenomenon approaches people usually, like most people don't enter into it seeking it out. And I've made this comment before. Usually, like in my experience, I wasn't looking for ghosts. Things happened, like communications happened without my trying. Like these things happened without my involvement whatsoever. They involved me, and it how I approach it, what goes on, has nothing to do with a belief system. It's like it created, it made itself known to me. It made itself known to me. And then I was able to explore it more. That's one of the reasons why I've tried not to assign too many like definite, oh, this is what this is. I mean, there's spirits I talk to where I know who they are because they've identified themselves, and I do believe that that's accurate. But we have had UFO sightings, multiple, that one, we're not seeking out. We weren't seeking it out in the slightest. When it happened, it was just like this like moment of not disbelief, but it's definitely not disbelief. I didn't believe that it came to you in that way, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure I was like a traditional UFO believer. I'm like, yeah, orbs. Yeah, I've seen orbs. I've had things happen, but until it actually showed itself very clearly, like rivets. You could see rivets in the side, like glass panels, like that kind of tangible, like what the heck, and things moving in and out of dimension. There was no belief system that I had previous to substantiate that. That appeared all on its own. So within reason, I haven't created any lore about it. I don't have a whole lot of theories. I know what I saw, but I don't know what it was. And so I have not created a belief system around it. So it hasn't functioned within that belief system. But that's not the only interaction I've had. Like, it continues. And I'm wondering whether or not other people experience that too, where you don't create a belief system around it, but it interacts with you. How does it interact with you? Is it different every time? Is there a consistent repeat of who you see, what you see, or, like how that works? That's super fascinating. Anyway, I don't know if any of that makes sense, but basically just kind of my contesting his idea that your belief systems determine, like that it adapts to. I do believe statistically that is true, but it hasn't been true for myself, for sure. So that's kind of how chapter 1 wraps up. It's kind of just setting like a backdrop of his ideas of, he's kind of just setting the backdrop of how his adventure starts, just jumping into it. And this episode is definitely going to be a little more like backdrop rather than the actual story, just because that's how the book begins. And I think that's fairly important to set up in a book like this. You need a decent amount of backstory to make sense of. what is going on. So if you haven't looked into ultra-terrestrialism or ultra-terrestrial theories, here is just a brief AI-based explanation, definition. An ultra-terrestrial is an Earth-based non-human intelligence or species that is not from another planet, but rather originates from our own world, either from another dimension, a hidden civilization, or as ancient terrestrial beings. The term was coined by ufologist John Keel. Okay, so he did come up with the term, I thought so, in 1970 to describe beings he believed were responsible for various phenomena, including UFOs, ghosts, and other high strangeness, suggesting a complex hidden aspect of the Earth's reality rather than just alien visitors. So the idea that it's coming from within the world itself, there's just so much you can do with that in terms of Gaia being a living being and how Gaia communicates with us. I do tend to lean towards ultra-terrestrialism rather than extraterrestrial. So, super fascinating topic. That, I would say, would be a good thing to keep heavily at the top of your mind when going through John Keel's stuff, is understanding how prevalent that theory plays, or how that theory plays into the research he does. And I think that's a great place to end chapter 1. His research beginning and coming at it with the perspective, understanding his mindset and how folklore starts, where his ideas about where a phenomenon comes from originates, and those are some of his investigative techniques that he approaches things from, are from those theories and perspectives. So we're gonna start on chapter 2. Got myself a cup of coffee. The creep who came in from the cold. This is such a fascinating topic. I don't know if you've watched Hellier or know any of the Indrid Cold lore, but he's such a fascinating subject. I also highly recommend checking out Hellier. I know I've mentioned it a few times. I like how in depth they got about talking about Indrid Cold. They got into Indrid Cold due to phenomenon interacting with them in a completely bizarre way. So how that information crept onto their documentary was super fascinating. Friday, December 22nd, 1967, chapter 2, they go into the actual town of Point Pleasant and start explaining the town that this phenomenon takes place in. So he's coming into it after the Silver Bridge had collapsed, and there's a 700-foot span that was just missing a bridge. I used to have a bridge. Oh my goodness. I can't even imagine the tragedy that this brought to the community. It was right before Christmas. Apparently people were Christmas shopping and on their way home from work, and families just out enjoying themselves in the pre-holiday excitement. Oh, December 22nd. Okay, so back to the first chapter. It was late November 1967. So 3 weeks after he started the first chapter. I was mistaken. It wasn't a few days. It was a few weeks after he had been knocking around. John Keel had been knocking around on people's doors trying to find someone with a phone who could let him make a phone call because his car was broken down. And then the Beelzebub rumor got started. It was 3 weeks after that point that the bridge collapsed. Oh, and this is where he brings up Mary Hyre, which I really like her character, which she's a real person, obviously. He says, after 25 years as the local stringer for the Messenger, recording all births, marriages, and deaths in the little town, Mrs. Hyre suddenly found herself at the center of the universe. So she was the reporter, the local reporter, and she owned the newspaper, and she was very worn out from all the activity in the newsroom, and because she was, back then information was passed around through the newspaper. That's how anyone found anything out, either word of mouth or through the newspaper. So someone like Mary Hyre would have been extremely busy in moments of high activity and people needing to know things. So she was just at her office constantly. He was already friends with her at this point because he had already interacted with her via the all the phenomenon that was happening, which happens previous to this tale. This kind of culminates into this moment when this bridge collapses, which is very tragic, but you'll see later on it's pretty crazy. Okay, so Men in Black basically start showing up and trying to intimidate Mary Hyre by asking just really strange questions. So it starts going into their descriptions, and the Men in Black phenomenon is very strange. And I've read some other of John Keel's books, one in particular, Our Haunted Planet, and he talks about the phenomenon and how it's been around for thousands of years, that men looking Asian, men wearing all black, they're like dark skinned, but they're not black, and they just have odd mannerisms, and they are also very short oftentimes. It follows the phenomenon. It's a part of the phenomenon. So they ask weird questions and make everyone very uncomfortable while they're doing it, because their mannerisms are just strange, like how they shake hands. Like he describes one of their handshakes as being like 2 index fingers, and like they'll reach in and people don't know how to take it. They're trying to shake hands, but like they don't know how to do it. Strange things like that. And they ask just bizarre questions. They seem to and when they introduce themselves, they'll be like, I know what I'm doing, who I am, like I'm with whatever, I'm a reporter from whatever newspaper. But then like they'll end up knowing nothing about newspapers or media, and they just ask really strange questions. Anyway, so that was their experience there. And then they seem to like ask people in this scenario to stop, or asking them what they would do if someone asked them to stop reporting on or talking about flying saucers. And Mary Hyre, of course, was like, get out of here. I don't know who you are. You're strange. Just leave. So, I mean, I like Mary Hyre's attitude. She doesn't seem like she's easily intimidated. And I really like she and John Keel end up teaming up on a lot of their investigations. She gets several visitors, one that looks Korean or just very unusual for that area. He had really long tapering fingers. That is another thing that people describe with Men in Black, having long tapered fingers, which is creepy. Black suit, always a black suit, slightly out of fashion. And they always use interesting names, just like Jack Brown, or something very simple, Smith. That's a very common last name that Men in Black use. Yeah, she keeps on getting asked about, what would you do if someone ordered you to stop printing UFO stories? And she's like, why do people keep on asking me this? And then they get like information from her by criticizing John Keel, which is a strange, like they just use tactics, manipulative tactics to get her to give them information. Anyway, so it kind of introduces the Men in Black. Part 3, he starts going into a story from April 22nd, 1897. An oblong machine with wings and lights, which appeared much brighter than electric lights, dropped out of the sky and landed on the farm near Rockland, Texas, owned by John M. Barclay. Barclay grabbed his rifle and headed for the machine. He was met by an ordinary-looking man who handed him a $10 bill and asked him to buy some oil and tools for the aircraft. "Who are you?" Barclay asked. "Never mind about my name. Call it Smith," the man answered. There's another one. Smith. Yeah, I just said Smith. Very common, like alien / Men in Black name. I don't know. The UFO lore is populated with mysterious visitors claiming inordinately common names like Smith, Jones, Kelly, Allen, and Brown. All right, so basically part 3, he's just going through stories of hoaxes that people have made regarding crashed UFOs and how it's hard to weed out hoaxes from, it's just him describing basically how to weed through them or how he's had to weed through them. The moment I met, so part 4 is he's talking about Mary Hyre's niece, Connie Carpenter, in 1966. I knew she was telling the truth because her eyes reddened, watery, and almost swollen. They were reddened, watery, and almost swollen shut. So she had red, swollen eyes. This comes up several times. Basically, like extreme sunburn or radiation burn, when someone sees these lights from UFOs and I've heard of this before. I've not had this experience, thank goodness, but basically people feeling like they're sunburnt and they actually have a tan and like tan marks on their skin where their clothes were, but basically it happened at night, and these UFOs that they saw left radiation burns on them. Super interesting. But Mrs. Heyer's niece, Connie Carpenter, had experienced this. Her eyes were just like swollen shut and red from having seen this. This goes into Connie's story, Mrs. Heyer's niece. Oh, she saw a giant winged man. So this is the first story of the flying winged man in broad daylight. According to her story, Connie, a shy, sensitive 18-year-old, was driving home from church at 10:30 a.m. on Sunday, November 27th, 1966, when she passed the deserted greens of the Mason County Golf Course outside of New Haven, West Virginia, when she suddenly saw a huge gray figure. It was shaped like a man, she said, but not much larger. It was at least 7 feet tall and very broad. The thing that had attracted her attention was not its size, but its eyes. It had, she said, large, round, fiercely glowing red eyes that focused on her with a hypnotic effect. I guess she had that radiation burn from seeing this winged flying man. That's super interesting. I've not heard that from Sasquatch or Bigfoot reports where they have the red glowing eyes or whatever color glowing eyes. I've not heard of anyone having radiation burns from that. Anyway, its wings did not flap in flight. It like glided, and it kept its eyes fixed on her face, and then it swooped low over her. So basically this is an introduction of the bizarre creature that this book is written about. Her eye issues lasted for over 2 weeks, and apparently it was caused by the glowing red eyes. At the time of my first visit to Point Pleasant in 1966, I did not relate the winged weirdo to flying saucers. Later events not only proved that a relationship existed, but that relationship also is a vital clue to the whole mystery. So yeah, he's basically linking up Mothman to the UFO phenomenon. It goes into this odd character experience that some people had. So it goes into a series of visits from very odd people, and it's kind of disconnected. So it's just talking about an odd assortment of visits that people have had with strange people, strange beings that were reported. And this one happened in the summer of 1967. So basically another Men in Black kind of thing. And thyroid eyes also seems to be, the bulging, like thyroid eyes. He describes them that way. Seems to be another component of some of the Men in Black. And they just act very bizarre. Like they don't understand how to ask. So this dude asked for a menu, and he was handed a menu, and the waitress observed him not understanding what that was. And he was just like, "No, I want food." And she just basically started to offer him, like, "What about a steak?" And he was like, "Sure." So it's like he didn't really understand what was going on. He just wanted food. And then he just like blunt, strange answers. And then she asked where he was from, and he said another world. So basically, I guess this time frame in the mid to late 60s had a series of very bizarre people in various places. That was in New York City. And then part 6, a large white car with a faulty muffler wheezed and rattled up the back streets in New Haven, West Virginia, where Connie Carpenter lived. That's Mrs. Heyer's niece. And Jack Brown knocked at her door. He introduced himself as a friend of Mary Heyer's. His odd demeanor really put her off and like made her suspicious. But so basically it's another situation where another bizarre man, dark, maybe Asian, but not really definable, came knocking and asking weird questions, making everyone really uncomfortable. And he also had long fingers, like long tapered fingers. There's something just really strange about him, and it put Connie off. And he was trying to get in contact with Mary Heyer. It goes into the story about someone posing to be an Air Force officer. So they impersonate military as well. There's usually something a little off about, like this one was very convincing. This one was in Minnesota, and this man that walked in was supposedly an Air Force officer, and he seemed all fine and normal until it came time to actually eat his food, and he didn't know what Jell-O was, and it was very strange for him. And he tried to drink it thinking it was liquid and was just very confused. And they had to show him how to eat it with a spoon, and just really bizarre. They just realized after the matter that there was just really bizarre things he didn't know how to do, like eat. This is also following a flurry of UFO sightings in Owatonna in Minnesota. He was one amongst many, apparently, that for years caused strange paranoia amongst people who were in the area that all these UFO sightings were happening, because not only was it strange that all these UFO sightings were happening, but the people that accompanied them, that came along, that were doing or behaving bizarrely, and whether or not they were actual men in black, nobody really knows. They don't know where they came from. They don't know who they were, because after research was done to try and find out who they are, they really come to a dead end about where this person came from. So that was just a strange phenomenon that seemed to follow this story. They pop up a lot throughout this whole book. It's really strange. And what their agenda is, no one really fully knows. They seem to be mischievous, and you'll see later on in the book, it can turn a little dark, but they don't really seem to be up to anything in particular. They just want to know things. And that's probably the weirdest part of all, because they don't seem to have an agenda. They're just collecting information, a lot of information. But they'll cover that more in the future. But yeah, they wear clothes that are sometimes very outdated, or things that like just don't make sense in the context, or like, show up in like short sleeves, but it's like a cold wintry day and they don't have a coat and they don't seem cold at all. That kind of weird stuff. Or clothes that are from the future that haven't shown up yet, which is another bizarre phenomenon. And they also like to collect, this one's super weird and interesting, they like to collect weird little things. Like they collect things for souvenirs. They get excited about like a pen. Really excited, like, can I have this? And like seem to treat it like it's some sort of treasure. Yeah, so some of the stuff that they pull out, like a wallet or a notebook, will be like brand new and looks like it had never been used, but the money they'll pull out is like brand new. Also, it's very strange like that. Delightedly walking away with an old magazine, pen, or other small expendable object. Apparently, these people also match the descriptions given about when a UFO has landed and people end up having conversations with their pilots. So like pointy features on their face, or long pointy fingers, creepy fingers, and like dark skin but not black. Are there aliens walking among us? Especially after a flap. That's a very interesting thing to think about. I would like to hear from somebody who's actually seen people by this description, because it can't have just stopped, but I'm sure they just get lost in a sea of people now, and people don't observe the people around them very much often anymore because our faces are so in our phones. So I'd be curious to know if this phenomenon still happens on a regular occurrence. Anyway, if you've ever had that kind of thing happen, please tell me. Part 8. So yeah, he goes on with more stories regarding these Men in Black visits, and how how they were constantly trying to figure out how Mary Hyre would react if someone ordered her to stop reporting flyer saucer sightings. That's another thing that's really weird to me. They always ask how she would react. They don't ask her to stop reporting on them. They don't ask, I don't know, they just ask how she would react if. But why is that important? Like, I'm not even sure that's ever really touched on in this. They just ask that question. I'm not sure they ever even know why they keep on asking that question. But yeah, so many people throughout the town who have some small association to her, they are visited by these bizarre beings, people, and ask really bizarre questions. And then usually at some point they're asked if they thought Mary Hyre would stop reporting about UFOs if someone asked her to. And that's just weird. I'm like, why didn't you just ask her to stop reporting on them? Why did they want to know how she would react? It's almost like, are they vulnerable? Do they have, sometimes I thought like, are they entities where they have to, if you do not give them encouragement or permission, they can't have an effect on you, that kind of thing. I've thought about that, because like when you're interacting with certain entities, with certain elementals, that's the word. I don't think it's good to encourage an elemental to interact with you a lot of times, because you just don't know their intent, and most of the time they're tricksters. And if you don't give them permission, it's just like walking through the Appalachians. If you hear someone calling your name, the usual lore that goes with that. The important part is to not interact with it. Just ignore it, because the reason they're trying to do that is to get your attention. If they can get your attention and you react and start engaging with it, then they can actually come into your space or have an effect on you somehow. So that's why I'm like, don't interact with it. Don't engage with it. Unless you know what it is and you're like trusting, or at least don't feel threatened. But most of the time in elemental, you don't know what they're up to. They're not for our good, and they're not for our bad. They're just, there's a lot of theories. I'm not going to go into that. But basically, I'm wondering if it's sort of one of those things where they need an invitation in order for them to have that kind of power or control. So they're getting a feel. That's just an idea. I don't know. But it's weird. So yeah, constantly asking about, and also manipulating and being tricky about how they ask questions. Just mentioning weird things like a UFO had been seen over the Silver Bridge just before it collapsed. And later he spoke to the person who had claimed to have told this other guy about it, and he denied it. So they basically go around planting rumors and information that can be proven to not be true, which leaves everyone like, well, wait, where did you hear that? Oh, I heard it from this guy. Very strange. He just showed up and started talking about this, which also a trickster thing, follows very much with kind of what I know of elementals. But anyway, that was a very strange part. He tells a lot of that kind of stuff in this chapter. And then he goes into explaining how convoluted and difficult it is to get any information from the military about any of these sightings or any of this activity, because clearly they have files. We know that now. So we know that they know more now. But back in like this time, 1960s and 70s, they definitely played it like they have no idea what you're talking about. And I'm sure to this day that there's some departments that will engage with it like that. We're like, we don't have anything about that. So he was just talking about his experience about going to the Air Force and the strange behaviors and what it was like just for him to try and get some discussion about it. And like, you're treated like you're an idiot if you go to them. So he was basically given the runaround about how to get information. So the Air Force told him it was in this location, like the Pentagon has it, and then he went to the Pentagon and they're like, no, they had it back at the place you were, and he basically just got the runaround for that, and that was very frustrating. And he realized that it was purposefully a mess. Like the files that they kept were intentionally a big mess, and that's kind of where he ends it on chapter 2. Basically, that's the long and the short of it. So first and second chapters are kind of setting the tone for what's going on here, the bizarreness of the activity surrounding Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the bridge collapse. And like I said, that was kind of the culmination of some activity, the phenomenon. He goes into more detail in the next coming chapters about these specifically about these flying men. I'm super excited to be getting into this. There's so many interesting points. This was a lot of heavy, just okay, maybe I didn't need to know all of that about the Men in Black, but whatever. It is relevant in the future, but he just lays out a bunch of information and also theories, ultra-terrestrial theories. And I honestly got a little impatient when I first started reading it. I was like, can you just get to the story, please? So if you've gotten to that point and you're like, where's Mothman? Where does he come in? It's coming, but I do like that he did set the backdrop for it. So I hope you stick around for more. It's pretty exciting. And there are several things to research that have been brought up to this point. Ultra-terrestrial, check out that if you want to know more, if you don't already know. Of all the things in this, the connection of ultra-terrestrialism to this whole story is, it definitely makes you think a little more about how our planet is a living entity of itself, and what if this is coming from her? What if this is coming from Gaia? What does that mean? And why is this such a bizarre method of communication? I don't know. Anyway, so many things, so many interesting things. This book definitely raises a lot of questions in my mind, contesting some of my theories from the past about the phenomenon. So I hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned for chapters. I don't know if I'll do just chapter 3 or 3 and 4, but I'll see. I'll keep you posted on that. But if you have a chance to go ahead and read ahead, do that. And I hope you will join me next time. Thanks. Bye.